When it comes to weapons in D&D, not all of them were created equal, and many are considered to be mechanically subpar. On top of this, the rulebooks don't provide us much detail on these weapons, leaving us to fill in the gaps of how our weapons look and feel. Due to this lack of information, I'd like to go through and examine all the weapons of D&D to answer: what is this weapon, both in history and in D&D? How is it different from the other weapons available? And does it need to be made better, and how can we do so? For today's video, let's look at a simple weapon that brings in some big stick energy: the Quarterstaff. The Quarterstaff is a shaft of wood usually between 1.8 and 2.7 meters long, sometimes with a metal tip at one or both ends. Quarterstaffs were traditionally made from hardwood like ash, yew, or oak, but East Asian staves may have also been made using bamboo or rattan wood. Each staff typically measured in at around the height of its user, plus an additional 20 centimeters or so for extra reach. The short staff, as it was also called, is believed to have developed from traditional staffs or long sticks that have been around since the beginning of recorded history as a tool and impromptu weapon. While not regarded as a military weapon, with professional soldiers preferring the use of a spear or bow, the Quarterstaff is generally regarded as a commoner's weapon that found more use in martial arts than in martial combat. In India, the martial art Silambam has focused on fighting with a bamboo staff since the 4th century BC. While potentially developed for self-defense purposes, it later evolved into a more dedicated fighting style, and was briefly used to combat the British East India Company in the later 18th century. Further east, the Quarterstaff found popularity in Japanese martial arts as well. In 1609, the small island of Okinawa, located south of Japan, was invaded by the Satsuma samurai clan. The Satsuma lords put in place a weapons ban, leaving the Okinawans defenseless against samurai weaponry. In an attempt to protect themselves, it is commonly believed that the people of Okinawa used simple farming implements, such as the tenbin staff and shorter bow staff, to defend themselves. As the story goes, the Okinawans developed these farming tools into their own fighting style, known as kobudo. While modern martial arts scholars have been unable to find historical evidence supporting this origin of kobudo, what we do know is that the bow was one of the earliest of all Okinawan weapons, and was widely adopted into classical bojutsu martial arts. Way over in Europe, the Quarterstaff found a lot of favor in England specifically. The Quarterstaff was described by fencing masters such as Joseph Swetnam, Zachary Wild, and Donald McBain as among the best, if not the very best, of all hand weapons. With its popularity skyrocketing, the fighting techniques developed for the Quarterstaff during the 16th and 17th centuries are believed to have made up the basis for the fighting styles of many other polearms and two-handed weapons at the time. Favored by the London Masters of Defense, a fencing school established during Henry VIII's reign, the Quarterstaff was used a lot in prize fights, and was even used in Boy Scout training until the early 20th century. In the modern age, the Quarterstaff has remained popular through the continued practice of martial arts, as well as its use in film and media. In India, Silambam was banned by the British in 1804 in favor of modern military training, but films in the 1950s and 60s by M.G. Ramachandran helped popularize the martial art with modern audiences. Bojutsu and historical European martial arts also regularly use the Quarterstaff in demonstrations, and mastery of the staff is a cornerstone of these practices. In D&D, the Quarterstaff is described as a simple, two-handed melee weapon. Usually made of wood, it would measure in at 1.8 to 2.5 meters long, and had a diameter of 5 to 10 centimeters. Occasionally, they may also be enhanced with metal shod ends or textured striking surfaces. Present in every edition of D&D, early stat blocks of the Quarterstaff had it cost up to 5 gold pieces, weigh 1.8 kilograms, and deal 1d6 bludgeoning damage. In 5th edition, the Quarterstaff costs 2 silver pieces, weighs 1.8 kilograms, deals 1d6 bludgeoning damage in one hand, and deals 1d8 bludgeoning damage when held in 2 hands. The Quarterstaff is an interesting weapon to look at, because I can honestly see arguments for both sides about whether it's a good or bad weapon. On the one hand, the Quarterstaff has the versatile weapon property, which states that the weapon can be used in 1 or 2 hands. When held in one hand, it deals 1d6 bludgeoning damage, but when held in 2 hands, it deals 1d8 damage. With this weapon property, the Quarterstaff can rival the damage potential of the Great Club or even some martial weapons, at the cost of needing both hands to do so. On the other hand, all of this can also be said for the Spear, which is another simple melee weapon that deals 1d6 damage and has the versatile trait. While the Spear costs 1 gold piece compared to the Quarterstaff's 2 silver pieces, the Spear weighs a little less and can be thrown up to 60 feet. There's also the difference between bludgeoning and piercing damage, but as I've covered in other videos, there's not enough monsters in 5th edition that have resistances, immunities, or vulnerabilities to different damage types for it to ever really matter. So while yes, using the Quarterstaff would be a good choice, there are better choices within the simple melee category that overshadow what the Quarterstaff can do. Now, we also need to take all of this in the context of what classes tend to start with and use the Quarterstaff. I know when I hear Quarterstaff, I tend to think of the monk class, probably because I watch too many Donnie Yen movies. However, druids, sorcerers, warlocks, and wizards can all start with and use quarterstaffs. Now, these classes are not meant to be using these as main fighting weapons, but mostly as backup options should the situation call for it. And in this context, the Quarterstaff does that job fairly well. All in all, the Quarterstaff is really not that bad of a weapon option. It's cheap, has good damage, and the versatile feature gives players a choice between having a free hand or potentially doing more damage. Unfortunately though, it doesn't really have any reason to use it over other weapons in its class like the Spear, leading to it being overlooked by many players. So while we don't necessarily need to make the Quarterstaff better, how can we make it stand out more as a weapon option that people would be more likely to use because of its unique features? Well, my first suggestion would be to give the Quarterstaff the double weapon ability from 3rd edition. In 3rd edition, a character can fight with both ends of a double weapon as if fighting with 2 weapons, but incur all the normal attack penalties associated with 2-weapon combat. In 5th edition terms, this would mean that a character wielding a quarterstaff could use their bonus action to attack with the opposite end of the quarterstaff, which would allow the wielder to have a bonus action feature that they can use once per turn. In terms of game balance, this bonus action attack could be restricted to dealing 1d6 or even 1d4 damage instead of the versatile 1d8, but it still has a chance to critically strike as a separate attack. The important caveat here is that this feature already exists in 5th edition as part of the Polearm Master feat, which grants a bonus action attack when using glaives, halberds, quarterstaffs, or spears. So, adding this innately to the quarterstaff would rob this feature of one of its 2 main benefits. While I personally feel that spears, glaives, and halberds have enough properties that make them more than viable without this ability, I did want to note that implementing this suggestion for the quarterstaff takes away a big part of that feature's benefits. My second suggestion on how to make the quarterstaff stand out more would be to add a trip attack to it. As an action, a character could use the quarterstaff to attempt a trip attack on an enemy within range. The target must roll a dexterity saving throw, where the difficulty class could be 8 plus the character's attack bonus with the quarterstaff. If the target fails the check, they are knocked prone. While this feature is present on the bow staff in Pathfinder, I believe adding it to the base quarterstaff would give this simple weapon a reliable way to inflict conditions onto enemies, which allows party members to set enemies up for follow-up attacks and makes it harder for the enemy to get away. Now, this ability would slightly conflict with the Battlemaster's trip attack maneuver, but I feel that since that maneuver retains the damage of the trip attack, whereas this proposed feature sacrifices damage to just try and trip the target, I feel that this suggestion keeps the Battlemaster's trip attack rewarding for the fighter, while the quarterstaff still gets a unique ability. My third and final suggestion on how to make the quarterstaff stand out would be to give the quarterstaff the Reach weapon property. The Reach property adds 5 feet to your reach when you attack with it, as well as when determining your reach for opportunity attacks. Found on glaives, halberds, lances, pikes, and whips, there isn't currently a reach weapon that deals bludgeoning damage. Giving this property to the quarterstaff gives characters more control over the battlefield, and helps quarterstaff users distance themselves from enemy attacks while still dealing damage as they move through combat. I will note that I did also suggest this for the Great Club in that weapon breakdown video, but even if this were added to both weapons, I feel that having 2 reach weapons in the simple category would still be balanced given the other suggestions I put forward for each of the weapons thus far. Now, these are just a few of my own suggestions on how to give the quarterstaff some unique features that will help it stand out among the rest of the weapon options in D&D. As I said before, the quarterstaff is a good weapon as is. However, should any or all of these suggestions be implemented, I feel that the quarterstaff will keep all of the things that make it a good weapon now, but have additional features that make it feel more rewarding, impactful, and fun to use for characters who wish to do so. With that being said, that's going to bring us to the end of today's video on the quarterstaff. Despite its effectiveness, the quarterstaff currently feels like a filler weapon. Its presence as a simple melee weapon adds variety for the sake of variety, but doesn't give us any reason as to why we should use it over something else. With just a few tweaks here and there, we can make its current users feel more rewarded and give new users a reason to try it out. Regardless, what I want to know is, what do you think of the quarterstaff? Do you think it's a perfectly fine monk weapon as is? Do you think one of the suggestions I put forward can make it more popular? Or did you have a different suggestion for how to make it stand out? You can let me know down in the comments section, or you can discuss it on the Altroll Discord using the link in the description. While on the server, you can pop into our courses that teach the basics of D&D, and if you like what we do, supporting us on our Ko-fi goes a long way in helping us keep Altroll going. However, that's all I had for you. Thank you all for watching, make sure to have a great rest of your day, and I'll see all of you next time.